You're in for a real treat now as Lilian Hedley talks frankly and refreshingly about her apprenticeship with Amy Emms. Studying with a master, any master, is hard, and one of the tidbits we learn is how Lilian needed to be patient before daring to attempt to tweak established hand quilting designs and make them her own. Lilian had no personal history in quilting, but this hasn't stopped her from becoming a master in her own right. So enjoy this entertaining and educational feature from this year's festival.
Hello, my name's Lilian Hedley and I'm a North Country quilter. North Country means you come from the northeast of England. It used to be commonly called Durham quilting, but now it actually encompasses the whole of the northeast because we've discovered that there's no difference between Northumberland and Durham. Everything is the same style. This little piece I'm going round now is a feather. We're very famous for our feathers, and it's just a little corner piece on a cushion. I'm coming to the end now, so we do a tiny back stitch on the spot, and then I'm going to set off again on another line. I don't actually have any quilting background. My mother actually loathed sewing, and so did my grandmother. I was born in Wallsend, which was in Northumberland then. It's now part of Tyne and Wear, although I've lived since 1968 in County Durham. I was very lucky in the early days to meet Amy Emms. Amy Emms was the person for whole cloth quilting of this particular style. She was very good in the fact that she kept it going through all the unfashionable days in the 50s and 60s when most people weren't quilting. I'll just put a knot in here. You start with a knot and then a back stitch to anchor it and then carry on. So Amy was very good to me when I first started, and I was very lucky to have 10 years with her before she died, because she was 84 when I met her and she was 94 when she died. But she was very good. She taught me how to draw feathers without drawing skills, how to make templates without maths, traditionally the way her mother taught her. She could be a bit of a tartar if you didn't actually follow everything that she did. She didn't like you to change anything. I remember once she taught me how to do a long border feather with a double stem in the middle. And the first time I did it with a single stem, she nearly wore a hole in the quilt, pointing at it and saying, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, I fancied a change." Well, World War III, I think, had erupted when I said I fancied a change. You didn't change anything. You had to do everything the way Amy showed you. And I remembered that as long as she was alive, and I didn't make any changes until after she died. I like a slightly slack tension. I'm a great believer that no two people use the same tension, although Amy always said it had to be drum tight, and she was forever tightening my tension up, and as soon as she moved away I slackened it off a bit because I like a bit of movement in my tension. This is a piece that's almost finished, because normally in North Country quilting you start here and you work from right to left unless you're left-handed, and all your fabric falls over this side. But because this is the very last piece and it's too far to stretch over there, you turn it around and you work the last little piece towards you. Pop your knot, do a tiny back stitch to anchor it, and then we set off again. White quilts were always classed as the best quilts because they were very hard to launder and keep clean, particularly in the old cottages when they had coal fires and there was always soot flying around. And so, you know, if you had a white quilt, that was really doing very well because it was the kind of colour that you couldn't use all the time, so it was really kept as a best quilt. The everyday quilts were actually the strippy that's behind me. If you had more than one quilt, then your strippy was on the bed for every day. But your whole cloth, the white one, only came out on special days. particularly if someone was ill in the family and you had to call the doctor. Because if you had to call the doctor, you had to pay him sixpence to come. And so therefore you put the best quilt on the bed for the doctor coming. The other time you put it on the bed was when you had a new baby in the family. You put the best quilt out when the neighbours came in to see the new baby. But of course, as soon as they went away, you whipped it out of the way in case it got marked or damaged. I'm just going to put one single knot in here. You don't like a big bulbous knot, which is why I don't roll it in my fingers, because you want to be able to pop this knot through all of the layers out of the way so that you're not showing it to anyone. Then I do a tiny back stitch again just to anchor that. My teaching career started by accident. I decided I wanted to meet other quilters, and so I put a piece in my local paper inviting them to my house so that I could meet other quilters. And this was back in 1982. And 15 ladies replied. And my idea was at the time that if we met once a month in each other's houses, I would only have it in my house once a year. But unfortunately, everyone else who came didn't have a house big enough, and they wanted to have it in my house. And after having it in my house, they decided to have it every Tuesday. My husband obligingly went out. And so I ended up, it was 12 ladies in the finish. And at first we were just a group sewing our own things. But then I realised that I'd got further than they had in the stitching, because I had been sewing since 1975, and they then wanted me to teach them. It progressed from there, and the local authority heard about me, and they asked me if I would teach there for them as well. And I've been teaching ever since. I teach both patchwork and whole cloth. But whole cloth is my first love and my speciality. You go forward one stitch when you're going to finish, come up along the side of the stitch, go under the last stitch and over a line. When that line quilted, it will actually be picked up a second time. These feathers that I'm quilting around here at the moment are very easy to actually draw. We don't use stencils or patterns or anything. You can actually freehand draw them. And these were actually called penny feathers or penny halfpenny feathers. But this was the old imperial penny halfpenny they're talking about. So I'll give you a little example of how we draw feathers. This is the straight Northumberland feather. And this is the kind of feather that Amy taught me to draw, although she was fonder of the Durham running feather. And you just come along with an old, this is an old imperial penny. They used in those days whatever they had in their pocket or their cupboard to make their templates. And then when you get there, you turn round and come back the other way. And they would have done these straight onto their quilts. They didn't worry about things being perfect, as long as it actually got the mark on for them to draw. And then you turn around again. And your hand always goes to the right if you're right-handed and left if you're left-handed. And then it's up and round the penny. Turn it round again. Your hand is exactly the same when you're coming this way. And then when you get to this point, you want to put a top on here. So you just come in a little bit at this side, a little bit more, and then one on the top. And just keep turning it until you get what you're looking for. There we are. That's the basis of the straight Northumberland feather. This is the Durham running feather. I'll pick up the wrong coin. You want the halfpenny, the penny. And you just follow this round in the curve, doing the same as you did with the straight one. And you have to leave room at the top to put your top on. One of the things that you never do is put a top on a feather until you've actually drawn it, because you don't know what the feather's going to look like. there. And then we start again on the right, up and round the coin. Don't go straight across, because that's a leaf. Now when you come to this bend, you need to get a nice long tail on. Didn't do very well there, did it? You need these sweeps because that's what makes the feather undulate. And then right round again, and then short ones. Now when you're doing this one, unlike the Northumberland one where you did a little bit each side, on the Durham one you actually go all the way that the feather is going so that you can bend the feather round. Put that one there, bring that round. There we are, the Durham running feather. This is your Durham running feather with your curve in, and on this particular quilt, here is your Durham running feather. Even on a patterned fabric, it stands out. This particular one is called the Weardale Chain. This was a favourite of Elizabeth Sanderson, who was a well-known quilt stamper, and she was very fond of this. She put it on a lot of quilts, and it does stand out very well. The loft is what you get between two rows of stitches, and you get a very nice loft on this particular pattern. I'm just finishing off this little bit of corner here, and won't take a lot of doing. There is another person who was also very influential in my quilting life, a lady called Dorothy Osler, and I learned something different from both of them, from Amy and from Dorothy. Whereas it's the late Amy Emms, of course. Dorothy Osler is still very much alive, and she taught me how to sort out history and fact from fiction, which has been very helpful in everything that I've done. It's no good when someone says, my mother made this and did such, and you can tell from the pattern and everything about it that she couldn't have. We used to have professionally stamped quilts. The lady I mentioned on the Strippy, Elizabeth Sanderson, was what was known as a stamper. The reason she was called a stamper was because she was a designer of quilts, but because she drew them freehand straight onto the fabric with blue crayons, everybody thought she had a machine that stamped the pattern out. So she was known as a stamper, but really she was an early designer of her day. Those quilts with the blue crayons on are very much sought after. And Elizabeth Sanderson actually lived in Allen Heads, which is in Northumberland. But a lot of her apprentices came from Weardale, which is in County Durham. And if you still find a one with the blue crayon pencil marks on, they are very, very valuable. Because in those days it was one-upmanship to send your quilt away to be marked, you see, by a professional, instead of getting the local lady to do it or do it yourself. So when they actually got it done, usually for a daughter's wedding or some special occasion, and they didn't like to wash them because they didn't want to wash the blue crayon marks out, because it was one-upmanship to have one of those quilts. Unlike today, you see, when everybody gets paranoid about lines on your quilts, they didn't worry about that in those days. Just put another knot in here to go on another line. And there you go. That's Durham quilting for you.